One of the largest reparations campaigns for African Americans in contemporary U.S. history has had recommendations approved by a California reparations task force. The proposed reparations, however, have drawn criticism from some who question whether they go far enough to address systemic problems in the Black community. According to Task Force Chair Kamilah Moore, the task force was created through a bill written by Shirley Weber, a former assemblywoman who is now California's first African American Secretary of State. Gavin Newsom, the governor, signed the bill into law in September 2020. The task force's next and final meeting will take place on June 29, at which time the California legislator will receive the report. Supporters of the report hope that it will serve as the basis for a state law that could be considered by the legislature by the end of 2023 or early 2024. According to Moore, who spoke with ABC News, the task force's report adheres to the principles set forth by the UN for helping victims of international human rights violations. According to Moore, the task force hasn't necessarily endorsed any specific dollar amounts. "We just approved a method the economists and public policy experts we hired used to determine the total losses in the areas of health harms, the undervaluation of Black businesses, housing segregation, mass incarceration, and excessive and unjust policing." Moore claims that the task force recommended that eligible Californians be granted atonement under the 5 categories of reparations recognized by international law: monetary compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. In the task force's recommendation to state legislators, Moore cited remedies for Holocaust survivors in Germany and reparations for Japanese Americans who endured internment camps during World War II. All African Americans in California who can prove they had an ancestor who was either an enslaved or a free person in the United States in the late 19th century are eligible, according to her. According to Moore, $1.2 million is the maximum amount economists estimated a resident could receive if they lived to the age of 71 or older and experienced more severe forms of racism for longer periods of time. The task force is allegedly pushing for every Black Californian to receive $1.2 million, according to some media outlets that have reported false information, the spokesperson claimed. Reparations for the descendants of slaves are supported by 77% of African Americans, according to the Pew Research Center. However, at least one well-known opponent claims that reparations do little to address enduring problems in the community like poverty and gun violence. Reparations, according to Black civil rights activist and founder of the Woodson Center, Bob Woodson, would only serve as a diversion from more pressing problems. It really diverts attention away from the important issues, according to Woodson. Not just Black Americans are suffering from this moral and spiritual freefall, as homicide claims the lives of our young people at the highest rate. Homicide is the leading cause of death for Black men under the age of 44, accounting for 26.1% of deaths for those in this age group and 35.1% for those in this age group, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But Andre Perry, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute who specializes in majority Black communities and has conducted research on reparations, warns that it is risky to ignore the underlying causes behind these alarming statistics. According to Perry, wealth is a predictor of many behaviors. People with low wealth or negative wealth are much more likely to engage in risky behaviors, such as violence. Woodson expressed concern about the state's and its citizens' financial burden that the reparations payments would impose. "For us to be taking seriously a discussion about whether or not a state should go bankrupt, almost, paying Blacks reparations as if that would solve the problem," Woodson said. Perry argued that states frequently establish emergency funds when necessary and that reparations could be handled similarly. Moore mentioned a state lawmaker's suggestion to make payments over a specified period of years in installments. According to her, systemic discrimination has cost Black Americans in California a staggering amount of money over the years. The task force's economists came up with a figure of $800 billion, she said. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri introduced a $14 trillion federal reparations bill on Wednesday in an effort to narrow the wealth gap between African Americans and white Americans. At a press conference on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, Bush stated that the United States has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of Africans and its lasting harm on the lives of millions of Black people. When asked how the government would distribute $14 trillion, Bush responded that she was in discussions to find a solution. The congresswoman stated at the press conference that "we're still having those kinds of conversations." We're collaborating with the administration and speaking with other congressional representatives. However, if we can continue to spend trillions of dollars on wars that will never end, then we are talking about events that are currently taking place. Andrea Jordan of Sacramento, California, said, "The most important thing are descendants," when asked what she would do with the money received from reparations. "To be able to give them the tangibles that I would not otherwise be able to do." Jordan spoke to ABC News about the harm done to her grandfather after laws were passed in Mississippi decades ago to take his land. "He understood what they had done as a man and as a black man," Jordan said. "He was a cruel person because of what they did, and he passed away frowning because he was aware he couldn't leave for his family before he did." Jordan feels that reparations should be given to African Americans. "We had such a deficit when we started that no amount of life could even begin to fill it. This would therefore level the playing field. It's also past due," Jordan said. "Our blood is all over this country.